Hello, everyone. So excited to have you all here to talk with Sarah Wells, who is the CEO and founder of Sarah Wells Bags, as well as the author of a book called Go Ask Your Mothers. It is a great book. I actually was walking through Reagan National Airport and sort of did a double take at one of the bookstores because they had a whole table set up with this book that I had never heard of. And I was just so amazed that talking about mothers at work was front and center at a bookstore in a national airport where sort of we have all of the foot traffic of our congressmen, our senators, and it was just exciting to see. And so I picked up the book, I read it, and then reached out to Sarah and said, "Hey, will you come chat with us?" And she thankfully said yes. So Sarah, before we start chatting, I'll just read some of your bio so that folks have a better idea of who you are and your background. But Sarah is a leadership expert and advocate for working mothers. After a decade at Women in Government, where she championed policy initiatives for women in office, she became the executive director of the National Consumer Voice for Quality Long-Term Care. In 2013, Sarah shifted to entrepreneurship, founding Sarah Wells Breast Pump Bags. And inspired by her own experience as a working mother, she created a beloved brand that empowers moms with functional, stylish products. Her entrepreneurial journey and passion for supporting working moms culminated in her first book, Go Ask Your Mothers, where she shares insights on fostering workplace support for parents. So, Sarah, thank you
Thank
for
you.
being with us today and giving us a little of your time to share more about the book. And I guess, can you just tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you ended up finding Sarah Wells breast pump bags and then writing this book?
It's been a journey, absolutely. So, as you can probably tell from my bio, I'm not a handbag designer by trade. I'm a public policy wonk by heart. That is why I came to Washington, D.C., where I am still now. And I was really always invested in women's health policy and elevating women's voices and working through systems to make change for women. But it wasn't until I had my own baby and went back to work where I was leading that nonprofit that I had the product idea. And that was me going to Capitol Hill, sitting in lots of meetings all over DC, schlepping a breast pump bag or breast pump with me and all of the bottles and bags and things that went with it. And it was partially about style and professionalism and a lot of commentary I would receive in meetings about having all of this stuff with me over a decade ago. But it was also a dignity issue for me because I felt like I worked really hard for this career. I'm very passionate about it. I present myself in the way I want to be received, and I'm a high energy person. I'm traveling for work. I'm bopping between meetings, and now I'm a new mom and I want to achieve new goals in that space. And these two things don't feel like they're merging. And so at the time, it was in a very acute issue of needing bags and supplies that worked in the professional environment for me through my breastfeeding journey. So I founded the company. It took a couple of years of nights and weekends, as many solopreneurs go through, to bring their idea to life. And one of the things I said to my mentor early on is I'm really afraid moving into a product based business that I will lose the opportunity for advocacy and to champion the issues I care about. And I'll never forget, this is literally 13 years ago. Nancy said to me, "This is never going to happen. Like, it's impossible for you to do that. So I'm not worried about it. Carry on." And she's
Yeah.
right. So over the years, we've created this really amazing brand and have expanded the products that we offer to support breastfeeding parents all over the world. And at every opportunity that has presented itself, we found some way to be charitable or to be advocates. We, during the pandemic, this is a really cool thing. We actually paid for parents to send in their breast pumps to us, which we cleaned and donated to engineers who were reverse engineering them for ventilators, which was really
Wow.
incredible. So, I found advocacy at every turn in those 10 years. But 4 years ago, I was on a podcast and I got asked a question I'm asked every single time I'm in an interview, which is what can working moms do to advocate for themselves when they go back to the office or they go back to their job to better transition after having a baby or adopting a baby? And I answered it, got off, and I said, "This is my book. I've always wanted to write a book. hadn't really hit on the topic, this is the topic because I just feel that even after a decade of working in this space, the conversation seemed to always be about what moms had to do more of in order to be successful at work. And what
Yeah.
really was lost in that is the fact that the power dynamic does not lie with the mothers. There are lots of moms that do feel empowered to speak up for themselves, but there are lots of mothers in this country outside of Washington, D.C., and many other places of this country where you cannot risk your family's economic stability to speak up asking for a lactation room, right?
Yeah.
Or you don't know what to ask. You don't know what your rights are. And so really to me, it all starts with the employer. And that
Mhm.
is what I set out to do with the book. And then 4 years after having that thought and getting a publishing deal and going on a book tour, which I just wrapped up, I'm here trying to get that message out to employers.
I love that. And I'm a single cat lady, so I have not had children, but ever since I've been talking about this book, I've heard consistent feedback that your bags are the best, right? And have been such an important part of so many mothers' journeys after having their children. So thank you for doing that, right? Like being an entrepreneur is not easy. And to take a step away from advocacy to say, I'm going to fill this need is scary. And I'm thankful for you for doing that and for bringing this book to life. And in the book, you focus on mothers who have recently made the transition to parenthood and who are navigating new lives at home and work. Can you just spend a couple minutes talking about what struggles they're facing and how they're different during that time period than they may be in the continuum of parenting?
Absolutely. So, yes. So, the really wonderful thing about having my business as a platform is that talking to tens of thousands of moms every year. So, I had this like built in audience to interview, to poll, to survey. And what I think really helped inform this is even though almost a generation really has changed in the 10, 11 years I've had this business, people are still saying the same thing, right? They're still saying what happens at the end of the day is even with the best policies, benefits in place at an organization, let alone if you don't have that, but even with the best, when there's not strong communication between management, or I use the word manager throughout and I'll say it here, but I really mean whoever's the boss, whoever's in charge of people, whether it's that or HR or CEO, when there's not intentional communication coming from that side on how to support working moms, they often can't stay. They
Right.
really don't feel supported. And that struck me through all of these informal conversations. And then when I did some more formal interviewing for the book, was I mean, a couple of times I remember being on interviews saying, so you're saying the thing that would make the difference is just a chat or a text message? Like it's not longer paid leave necessarily. It's not XYZ. It's not a fancy lactation room. You're telling me it really is just your manager saying, if you need something, it's safe to ask
Um,
for it or talk about it. And over and over and over again, the mom said, that's really what it is. And the vast majority of them are not having that. In the course of writing the book, several of my key interviewees left their jobs, like one of them even twice over, because they just couldn't find that strong communication. And they are changed. And I think this was like one of the really sensitive topics. And I personally understand this from my own motherhood journey. There's this internal battle between not wanting your organization or your employer to see you as being less, but
right.
you also know you are different. I think that most mothers did in my book and do agree in general that there are new facets to your life that are undeniable, right? There are new demands on your time and there's a whole lot less sleep. But
Mhm.
there is also this part that I try to reveal in the book, all these value add attributes that moms bring to the table. And moms are hesitant to explain that or bring that up or show those because they don't want to feel seen as different. And so there's just this kind of quiet conflict going on. Moms are like ruminating on no one's talking. It's not safe here. I might lose my job if I speak up. I don't know what to do next. I'm struggling. And they really need like the relief to come from the employer side.
Right. Right. And so you say it's as simple as a text message or just a chat to say, how are you doing? I'm here. Tell me if you need something. What's keeping people from having those simple conversations to make this better?
Absolutely. I think it's as simple as that. It's maybe easy for me, it's easy for some people, but it's not easy for everyone, and I think you're right, and I dedicate a good portion of the book talking about why managers aren't doing this. I wear an interesting hat in that I'm a working mom. I've been an employee working mom. I've also been working mom manager. I've worn all the hats. So I also can speak to some of them. When you don't have necessarily a shared or similar experience as your employee, there are just sometimes uncomfortable conversations. Lots of managers have said, I don't know how to talk about breastfeeding. I've never breastfed. I'm uncomfortable with this topic. I don't even know where to start. So, a lack of connection on a topic or understanding or feeling under resourced as management, I think that speaks to a lot about training and good support coming from higher up leadership to managers, HR to managers. Certainly, I think at least historically, and think it still is here today, some concern about the legalities or liabilities of asking about these topics. One thing I talk a lot about is like there are actually very few things you can't talk about. The things you can't ask about are very clear. You're not going to mess it up. It's very clear. And you can ask your HR what those are. And pretty much everything else is fair game. And no circumstance have I ever found where it's illegal to be compassionate. Right? Compassion is something you can always show, and you don't have to ask people a whole lot of personal information to show compassion. You can say statements instead of questions. Like, I am here if there's anything I could be of assistance to you, or my door is always open. Or if you happen to want to breastfeed and need information about that, I'd be happy to get that to you. You can come at these in a lot of different ways, but I do think managers who lack a connection to the issue, a concern about legal liability or not being able to deliver on what the employee would ask does hinder management from speaking up.
Yeah, and you do a really nice job in the book of talking about those things that keep this from happening. But then on the flip side, sort of give really great best practices for what moms and managers can be doing to increase that conversation. So, for those that are listening that may not have read the book yet, can you cover some of those strategies at a high level on how do we increase this conversation to make sure moms feel supported?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll start back with training. I think that that's huge. And as I've been out on book tour and talking with lots of businesses, more and more are tuning in that there is a need for more training in this regard. So I don't know about all of you, but I feel way more equipped to initiate something if I feel well researched on it, well resourced on it, kind of know the parameters of what I can and cannot say or what kind of support I could offer. So I think training is really, really key to anyone that supervises anyone else. One of the things that's kind of unique in the United States is compared to some other countries is like management is a part of hierarchy. So it's like a logical next step as you move up the hierarchy in an organization. That doesn't mean you're skilled in management and you might need training. In other countries in the world, management is actually like something you're hired into because you have management
Right.
skill and training. So I think acknowledging that people may have like earned that role because they are really good at what they do in projects, tasks, and meeting the objectives of the organization, but may not understand quite how to carry out people skills, people management. I think also I talk a lot in the book about like this is more work for managers. And so I think even being empathetic to managers, that they
Mhm.
too have to have outlets and opportunities to engage, help, and support, whether that's HR jumping in or starting up an employee resource group is a great way because you can get more peer to peer help to take a little burden off of management doing all of that. As a manager myself, I can say like taking on the emotions of your whole team and everything that's going on can be a lot amidst all of the other objectives you have to meet. So I think it's this overall holistic approach of being compassionate and understanding that these things don't just happen immediately. You have to learn how to have these communications. And then I would say just starting small. I talk a little bit about, I mentioned text message, right? So little icebreakers. You have an employee that's out on leave toward the end of their leave or in the middle of their leave, or even after they have a baby. You send a little text. How are things going? Is there anything we could be doing here to support you? What are you concerned about when you come back that I could get ahead of to help you with?
Yeah.
Text messages are like a little easier way sometimes to manage if you're not ready for a huge conversation about something. And they may, as a manager, give you a little heads up
Right.
to what could be something further coming so you can prepare.
So I'm going to go a little off script from the questions that I sent, but how much of that building of relationship and communication do you need to have before the woman goes out on maternity leave, right? Because I imagine if you don't have good communication with a team member and all of a sudden you're sending texts that say, how can I support you? They might not really believe that that's what you mean.
Yeah, as early as possible. In fact, I'm going to actually give you an example of why it's even more important than just for that one employee who's actually out on leave, right? It's important for the employee who's not yet starting a family, but has starting a family on their trajectory. I had moms that are now moms tell me before I became a mom, 5 years out, 3 years out, 2 years out, I was watching. How are the other moms treated? What's the communication like? What does my boss do? And I, if it was not good, exited right before or exited during leave. And if it was great, then I knew like I would be getting into a culture that I wanted. So I think another thing to keep in mind as an employer is it is, important. I would say if you haven't set the groundwork with an employee, it's never too late. So you should still send the text message. I think a compassionate text message, even if it's compassion out of the blue, is better than not. But
Yeah.
it really actually needs to start way before you have someone even coming to you saying, I'm going to need to use leave, or I'm going to be out, or I'm becoming a parent or a caregiver. And then, one of the other things I talk a little bit about the book, and I really loved diving into on book tour because I met lots of different kinds of caregivers, is that even more people than parents are watching this, right?
Yeah.
So you have people who have caregiving responsibilities to their parents or to a neighbor or any other, you know, way that we facilitate caregiving, of which there are lots of them. And people are watching how caregivers are treated within
Yeah.
organizations. And I would even say it stretches beyond that. Someone who's struggling with mental health that has nothing to do with caregiving is maybe watching how moms are treated with postpartum depression in the organization, or if you can take time off for appointments and so forth. So again, I think everybody's watching, and ultimately that's why supporting working moms supports the whole team and
Yeah.
really has like a ripple effect well beyond just retention of moms, but all caregivers, all parents, and really ultimately all employees.
Yeah. So I want to open it up to those that have joined us to ask questions. And if you're here, you can feel free to put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A box. And as you start to do that, Sarah, before everyone started to join, we were talking about sort of the economic benefit and the ROI of supporting moms, asking these questions, having these conversations. Can you just give us a high level sort of summary of all the data that you included in this book that gets to the business reason for why this needs to be happening?
Absolutely. When I set out to write this book, I thought to myself, I know I absolutely have to find the business case, the economic reason to do this. This is going to be the most boring, awful part of the book for me to write. And then I did it, and it was the best, most exciting part of the book, and the thing I actually came out feeling the most passionate about. We really, over the last decade, whether you're talking think tanks, scientific institutions, nonprofit organizations, international organizations, so much data has been gleaned on how economically profitable, I use that word, it is to support working mothers, to support women, to support caregivers, to support even dynamics of that, like mental health
Yeah.
in the workforce, how you actually will make more money as a company by doing so. And I became so enthusiastic coming out of this. And so, what I really focused in the book is looking at every possible angle of that. So, retention, you'll retain more employees. Recruitment, you and I earlier were talking about how transparent the job market is. You can just go find somebody else that's worked there and ask them whether it's a good place to work these days. Like, you can figure that out. So, recruitment, it's really important. I had moms tell me in interviews that they are boldly in the first interview before an offer asking now, what is your culture of support here for working moms and caregivers? Which I feel like when I started out, I would not have asked until I had an offer on the table, and maybe not even then. And people are just boldly asking that now. So I say to employers, you should even know how to talk about this in interviews, like at the get go, in terms of diversity and leadership. There are big investors now that won't invest in companies that don't have women in leadership to get women in the top ranks of your company or on your board, you have to support them while they're working moms, when they're starting out, when they're in their midway of their career, or we lose them in that pipeline. So, across all the different things you could think of that are contributing factors to economic success or to economic decline for an organization, there's data showing supporting working moms, supporting mental health, supporting all these elements make a positive contributing factor to success. So I think that's really exciting. And where I think that applies to anyone listening or to anyone thinking about this is really nice if your leadership, or if you are in leadership or your leadership just cares about this, then that's great. Like you're over the hurdle, right? If there's like a motive to do this, then great. For a lot of people I've met along the way since I released the book, the question is, how do I make people care? Well, you may not be able to make people care, but you can definitely show folks the bottom line difference. And a lot of times, really, it comes down to numbers to
Yeah.
influence decision making. So, my goal in the end with the book was to really make an airtight case for supporting working moms, whether it's altruistic or economic or
Yeah.
both. There's absolutely no reason, and really you're going to fall behind competitively with your other industry partners or sectors in terms of success if you don't support working moms.
So, a question that got sent to me is, what if you're a manager and you want to do this for your team, but the organization itself does not have a culture that would support you as you try to make things better for your team? Like, how do you navigate being that sandwiched person?
Yeah, well, here's what I think is the good news. You as manager may or may not have influence on some of the really big ticket items like paid leave,
Mhm.
or what the insurance policy covers, or whether you can take time off for appointments. But I have not met anyone in management who is shut down from being compassionate in their communication. So, at a minimum, you always have control over that. You have control over saying a nice word, having a door kept open, literally or figuratively, reaching out to your employees, really listening to them. And certainly, if you are in a management position, have some level of influence or the ear of leadership, then you bring to them the case.
Yeah.
You make the case economically, or I was mentioning earlier that I went to a speaking engagement where a company said that she was doing a detailed analysis at 1 year, 2 year, and 3 year exit of employees after having a baby about why they did that. What was it? Why did they leave a year after having a baby or 2 years after having a baby? And
Yeah.
compiling that for her CEO to show where the gaps were in what their support was. So if you can collect data, if you can make the case, if you can suggest improvements or policies, great. But I even think in the worst case scenario, people say over and over again that ultimately it's the manager that makes it. I had an example in the book where someone said the CEO is terrible, but my manager is amazing and I stay.
Yeah. Well, another question that has come in is, what can colleagues on the same team, so not managers, just coworkers, do to support working moms? And I'm just going to add to that a second part of the question, which is, how do we train everyone in an organization to be supportive of working moms?
Going through book tour, you're getting me at the end of it. It's been interesting because now I've gotten to hear like so many people's reactions to the book and what's going on in their lives. And I would say one consistent negative thing that has come out is a lot of moms really struggle with other women colleagues on their teams pointing out that they didn't have what is being asked for and they made it work. And that is interpreted from younger generations as being prohibitive to getting what they really need, the support, as being judgmental, as being just flat out inhospitable environment to work in. It may really be factual. I mean, things are really different than when I had my 13-year-old. I mean, really, they have. But I think one thing I would say to colleagues, to leadership, to management, is to look at like these intergenerational relationships and make no assumption that once a mother understands the next mother, we have to keep working at sort of bridging those divides and not making these assumptions that women just understand women. That's not how it works. Women are not a monolith. Moms are not a monolith, and we come from different experiences. And I think one of the things I've encouraged people in talking in book tour was to have some empathy for the older generations that did have it worse. That was probably terrible. I mentioned to you at the very beginning about going to meetings and being like ridiculed basically for having my breast pump with me. Like it was really hard, but also recognizing as colleagues or as other women or older women or women who don't have children, also that there's never a reason to hold back progress because we had something worse. It's our job to actually pave the way and open the door for things to be better behind us. But everybody said this on book tour that this is like the number, other than managers not talking.
Yeah.
Really, the
This
second thing is colleagues being really difficult, getting in the way of progress in this front.
Yeah. So, Sarah, you talked about sort of empathy for the older generations. How do we get those older generations to have empathy for younger generations? Because the world is very different, right? Like, yes, there is more conversation and there's more support for women in the workforce right now, but the workforce is very different now than it was in previous generations. I mean, just smartphones and having to be available 24/7 and post pandemic sort of this working from home, working remote, and juggling sort of the mother load that comes with everything that's in our society now, right? Like, I feel like there needs to be some empathy on both sides of that fence. And how do we foster that in work environments?
Absolutely. I would say, I spoke a little bit in terms of mothers in the book about the continuum of parenting. Like, I know that my own mother, who's a grandmother now, still has mothering concerns, still has stress about that, still worries about our kids, still shows up for us in all sorts of ways. So, recognizing that parenting doesn't stop at elementary school or college, that the continuum of parenting needs to be supported and that there are new issues that come up. Again, I talked about other caregiving, recognizing that older generations that may be done with having small children may be caregiving for their own elderly parents or siblings or have some other caregiving in their life. So making sure that we're asking everyone on our teams, what is it that you want and need to be successful here? Whether that is, concern about retirement, concern about healthcare, concern about taking time off to be with grandkids. Like, I think that everybody has some sort of need
Mhm.
for empathy. And so I think it really is, not just sort of expiring the support, making sure that they continue to ask all sorts of people. I even give an example, you know, if all you care about is running marathons, if that's like your jam, then like your manager should be asking you, what kind of support can we give you for that? Do you need to get off a little earlier on Fridays so you can get your training in for the weekend? You should do that. Like, and if you do that, you're probably going to support working moms too, or vice versa. Whatever is important to people should be important to the employer.
And I love that because that gets to everyone, right? That isn't just something that is asked of moms. It isn't just asked of women who have been moms, you know, in the past and continue that parenting journey, but in different forms and fashions over time. But it's for the men. And it's how do we help you support what's important to you, potentially including your kids and your family and your spouse. And so I love that by asking these questions that help moms, we can actually help everyone and we can see economic and return on investment. And it really just is good business.
I was in a presentation with a dad who gave just, I thought, one of the most inspiring examples to me. He said, when I came up and took the very first sort of dad parental leave that they had like ever offered here at his organization, there was a known cultural attitude that we shouldn't take it all. Like it's an accomplishment if we come back earlier than what we're given. And so he said, when I went out on my leave a second time, I took the whole thing, not for myself, but so that the younger generations of men behind me coming in have that as the norm. And that was such a perfect example of what I'm saying, that like he was conscientious about what has happened before, what's happening now, and what may come after, and how what he does and the choices he makes in regard to his, parenting in the office make a difference for other people too. And I just thought that was a great example. And I guarantee you, him taking that whole dad leave supports the moms taking their leave.
Yeah. I love that example, and I'm glad that that's the example that we're going to use to sort of close out this conversation, because we are a little bit past time. But Sarah, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your book. And even before joining us today, for writing this book and putting it together. I know there's data that I will use in the conversations I have about women in the healthcare workforce and why we need to be making these investments. I love that there's so many examples in the book of healthcare workers because 80% of the healthcare workforce is female. And so having these conversations with real examples and real data is just so helpful to move us all forward. So thank you again.
Thank
And for
you.
all of you that are watching and listening, the book is Go Ask Your Mothers. We included the link to where you can get it, but you can buy it everywhere. It is in bookstores across the country. And I hope you will consider giving it a read, and we will continue our conversations next week. We have a Meet the Author conversation with Brittany Barato, and she will talk about her book, Unlocking Women's Health. So stay tuned for more details on that one. And Sarah, thank you again,
Thank
and
you.
hope everyone has a great day.
Thanks so much.